Hey guys, it's Drew from Comics for Fun and Profit, and it's time again to support Hurricane. This is a fundraising comic convention for the Bethany Congregational Church of East Rockaway, New York, sent to us by our friend Donovan, our friend of the show and patron David Donovan. And why should you support Hurricane? And this year it's being called FurnaceCon as well, for that Bethany Congregational Church of East Rockaway, New York. Well, let me tell you in his own words. Hurricane Sandy hit my hometown of East Rockaway, Long Island. Homes were flooded, trees were toppled, boats were thrown on the mainland, and many residents were forced from their homes and lost everything. The relief center after Hurricane Sandy was located at the Bethany Congregational Church of East Rockaway Gym for months. Neighbors affected by Hurricane Sandy came in and walked out with whatever they needed to get on with their lives. Hundreds of people came to the Bethany Church during the following months, and the gym floor took a beating. The gym floor has been redone and looks great, but we still had to pay for it, and that is what Hurricane, a comic art convention, that is how Hurricane, a comic art convention, was born. In addition to housing the Relief Center, Bethany has hosted Next Step Ministries at the church every summer since Hurricane Sandy. Next Step went into the surrounding community and performs repairs for free. So why support Bethany Church? The church has been part of the community since 1885. The church runs the Thriftique, which is a thrift store that sells clothing and household items at very reduced prices to many low-income families in the area to come by and buy these items they could not afford somewhere else. Bethany also collects food for the Long Island Council of Churches Emergency Food Pantry and makes weekly contributions. Bethany Church is a member of the UCC and is an open and affirming congregation. That means that everyone is welcome to worship regardless of race, creed, religious affiliation, or sexual orientation. This winter, the church's furnace failed and had to be replaced. As you can imagine, this was a costly repair, and FurnaceCon came to be. What will you find at FurnaceCon 2022? Comic books, of course, but also comic book writers and artists, toys, food, local artists, collectibles, cosplay, fellowship, and much, much more. We hope you consider supporting FurnaceCon on June 4th, 2022, and Hurricane on later this year on November 11th. So we have two cons this year. If you're interested in supporting Bethany Church through their Venmo, you can do so at Bethany East Rock. It's Bethany hyphen East Rock. BETHANY hyphen East Rock, EASTROCK. And please include a note that your donation is toward the furnace. If you have more information, you can contact David Donovan at Hurricon, HURRICON, at yahoo.com, or give him a call, 516-209-1587. So support FurnaceCon on June 4th and save the date for Hurricane later this year, November 11th, all to support this church's efforts in their community.
Aloha, this is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing writer Nancy Collins. She is here to promote Blade Runner Black Lotus. Now, this is a mini-series from Titan Comics. It is a comic book sequel to the animated TV show that is on Adult Swim and I believe on Crunchyroll as well.
Yes.
Now, the first issue comes out on June 1st and issue 2 comes out on July 6th. Nancy, how are you doing today?
Aloha and mahalo for having me. Yeah, I'm doing just fine. It's a beautiful late spring afternoon in Macon, Georgia, which is now slowly turning itself into summer. Or it's already like 90 degrees out.
Oh God.
Yeah. But we're having a wonderful time.
All right. So now, listeners, before we get into the interview, I just want to go over Nancy's incredible history. Nancy, I did research on you. I'm going to say most of my information I got from Wikipedia. And listeners, I told Nancy she can correct me at any time. Now, you won the Bram Stoker Award for first novel winner for your first book, Sunglasses After Dark, that was written in 1990. Is that correct?
It actually came out in '89.
Oh, okay. All right.
But I won the award in '90. They give the awards out a year after the publication.
Okay.
But yes, I did win the Bram Stoker Award from the. It's now the Horror Writers Association. It used to be the Horror Writers of America, but now it's the Horror Writers Association, so they could keep the HWA, be more inclusive and still keep their initials.
Okay. And then now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you founded the International Horror Guild, is that correct?
Yes, I did. That was back in the mid '90s. The Sunglasses also won the British Fantasy Society's Icarus Award, also for first novel, and it was nominated for several other awards, but those are the ones that won. Nominated for the Tiptree and the John W. Campbell and the awards and the blanking on some of them, but it was nominated for a few awards at the time.
Off the cuff question, for that British award, did you go to England? Were you there?
They mailed it to me. They mailed it to me. Yeah. The British Fantasy Society isn't that well heeled.
But that would have been so cool if you got a free trip out of that.
It would have been nice. I would have loved it, but no, I got sent one. Sent mine in the mail. Joe Lansdale got his sent to him as well. We both won that year. I think they've changed the design of the awards since then, but they're big, large, heady, kind of dildo-looking awards at the time that look I think they're supposed to look like elder gods or something like that, but it was about a foot long and about a foot, like 6-8 inches long and about 5 inches around and less colored and
I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at your, but it's just how you're describing it. It's like.
Yeah, I mean, basically when Joe got his, he called me up because he knew I was getting mine, and he said, "Hey, did yours come with big red straps too?" And I went, "No." It was an honor, but yeah, I was somewhat surprised when I opened up the box. So, yeah.
Okay, maybe it was a good thing you didn't go on that trip, or you weren't invited. You'd be like,
both me and Joe. It's probably a good thing. The Brits probably wouldn't have been terribly prepared for us.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so as we mentioned, right, that so your first novel is Sunglasses After Dark that was published in 1989, and this is the first book in the Sonja Blue series. Is that correct?
Sonja Blue, yes. Yes.
And then also too, you wrote the Vamp novel series. Is that correct?
Yeah, the young adult. It was called Vamps. It was a young adult series, and the Gotham series. Vamps is a young adult series. I was asked to write something that was a cross between Twilight and Gossip Girls. So and so I gave them what they thought they wanted.
Yeah.
And it was my first attempt at writing young adult. I learned a lot writing that, so it was if nothing else, I got me outside of my usual thought processes and actually having to write for a younger audience. And then Gotham was a urban fantasy. That was urban fantasy series that came out in the 10s. Uh,
Okay. And then also too, you also wrote for other prose novels, in some other prose novels, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you wrote like the short story in Adventures of the Batman. Is that correct?
Work for hire stuff. Yeah.
And then also too, you also wrote for Hellboy, Odd Job. That also is another prose novel anthology.
Yes. Yeah. I've been friends with Mike Mignola for decades now.
It's nice.
Yeah, he and I have known each other since we both lived in New York. Uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, I remember when Hellboy was originally going to be the demon at
Mhm.
DC Comics, and they turned it down. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, that was originally the original idea for his. He wanted to do the demon, and they turned it down. So that eventually ended up becoming Hellboy.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Like we're doing a retooling of the demon.
Yeah. So, and then also too, and I also came across this, and correct me if I'm wrong. In 1995, you wrote a prose novel, Fantastic Four to Free Atlantis. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was another work for hire for Marvel. Yeah, they were hiring a bunch of prose writers and to do
Mm-hmm.
tie-ins, and I wanted to do a Submariner novel,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, and I pitched the Submariner to them and said, no, no, we're not. There's not enough interest in that. We don't have any movies with him coming out. But how about the Fantastic Four? And I said, can I put Namor in it? And they went, sure. So that so basically that's how I got to write my Submariner novel, because the Fantastic Four are barely in it. uh, but yeah, most of it's about Namor, and that's how I got around to writing my Submariner novel. So yeah, that's the last time I worked for Marvel.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but that's so cool. It's like, hey, can I put Submariner in there? Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, now this is a Submariner novel masquerading as a Fantastic Four novel. Not that anyone cared about that either. So.
Well, but the thing is, but if you think about it too, because Submariner kind of played, in the early Fantastic Four stories, um, Submariner played a key role in the Fantastic
Oh
Four.
yeah.
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 So yeah.
I don't know how they intend to introduce him into the Marvel universe without having the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Could, but then he'd also, but he, like I said, it's all problematic, and I've learned, I've since figured out that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is only tangentially involved with the comics anyway, so
Yeah.
you can, it's whatever universe you need it to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll find out more when I go to see Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
So.
Now, also too, you worked. You also, and I'm not going to list your too much of your nonfiction work, but the one I want to focus on was you wrote a nonfiction book called From Bayou to Abyss, examining John.
I have a story in there.
Oh yeah.
I have an essay in there. That's
Oh.
about. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of us in there, and I wrote a essay on creating when I using John Constantine in my run on Swamp Thing and introducing a new member of the Constantine family.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So who's a demonic pirate called Dark Constantine, who I recently discovered actually does have a fan base.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who go, I want to see another Dark Conrad story, and I said, well, don't tell me, tell DC.
Yeah. All right. All right, and then for comics, now, like this part, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first female writer on these following comic book series. The Swamp Thing, and that was is volume 2 of Swamp Thing, and your run was from 1991 to 1993.
Yes.
And then the issues that you wrote for were like from 110 to 139, annual 6 and 7.
Yes.
And then during your run, the Swamp Thing went from a DC line to a Vertigo line.
Yeah, I was the first writer to be published under the Vertigo imprint.
That is now off the cuff question. How awesome was that?
Well, at the time, it was like, well, we'll see if this takes off or not.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
I mean, we had a big, you know, meeting about that, and also doing crossovers within Vertigo, because they really didn't really know exactly what to do with it, except they wanted to separate it off from the regular DC universe at the time. And that was like me, Neil Gaiman, Pete Milligan, Grant Morrison, Ann Noccetti. I'm trying to think who else was involved. Rachel Pollack, in terms of writers, brought in, and they basically brought us in to figure out what to do in terms of doing crossovers and try to promote the line and stuff like that. So yeah, I was the first woman to write Swamp Thing. And I was the first for like decades. I think they've since had another woman write it. So,
oh yes. Yeah.
So
during your Swamp Thing, where I'm going to jump to a question already ahead, but did you work with of course you worked with Karen Berger. Did you work with Tom Peyer? And
I knew Tom. I didn't work with Tom.
Oh, okay.
I know Tom. He was a friend. I didn't work with Karen that much. My editor at the time was Stuart Moore, who he and I worked very closely together. I had several artists. Although the one that did most of the penciling work was Scott Eaton, but my inker Kim DeMolder was with me from start to finish. That's a key, by the way. People go, hey, how about you girls working on Swamp Thing? You and Kim. And I was going, well, Kim's a dude. oh yeah, it's a man's name.
Now, the other thing too about your Swamp Thing run was that was because my understanding was that you had sorry, this is another off the cuff question, was that your love for the Swamp Thing it went back more to you went back to like the Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson.
Yeah, very much from the start.
Yeah.
I was a comic book kid back in the day. I mean, I started reading. I mean, I've always read comics because it was just part of the culture I was soaking in growing up. But I started actively buying and collecting comics when I was about 11, 12. I guess that's about the age you really start doing it, when you start having your own money, pocket money, and you can go and get what you want. And back then, they were 15, 20 cents and a piece, and they were at the grocery store and the drugstore.
Yes.
In the spinner racks, and I ended up. I was also a monster kid from the very get-go. So, being both comics and monsters, and that was the early '70s. That was when the heyday of the second heyday of, or I should say, maybe the silver age of the monster comics.
Yeah.
They hadn't been allowed under the comic code for like a decade or two by that.
Yes. Because I'm going to say I vaguely, because I and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I vaguely remember, I think like
Dr. Wortham.
I'm sorry?
Dr. Frederick Wortham.
Yeah. Oh, for the
seduction of the innocent. Where he was kind of blaming all kinds of ills on juvenile delinquents on comic books. It's weird. I have this weird connection to him because he was my first husband's mother's mentor. He was a psychologist.
Yes.
And psychiatrist, and she was a child psychologist, and he was her mentor. And so she went to he mentored her as she was becoming a child psychologist, and so I got to most comic book people were just, oh, Dr. Wortham, they hated him, but she spoke glowingly of him because she didn't have any idea what the side effect of all of that had been.
Yes.
And but I also learned that uh, he had been the psychiatrist who interviewed he did one of the first interviews of an actual what we would consider a modern serial killer back in the 1920s,
Oh.
which was Albert Fish.
Uh-huh.
And so he was he was like one of the first uh, psychiatric criminal profilers. So he saw a lot of shit. Just put it politely. And weirdly enough, he, even though he had a very low opinion of comic books, he apparently loved fanzine fandom. And he loved it. He thought that was amazing, and he was like all for like fanzine fandom. So he was an interesting man. I think somewhat misunderstood.
Yeah.
But then again, he also kind of misunderstood things as well. So
yeah.
But yeah, that's my connection to the Comics Code. Seduction of the Innocent. That's how we ended up with the Comics Code, where you couldn't have zombies or vampires or werewolves in comics for like over, from like the late 50s all the way up until early 70s.
Yeah.
No undead, no undue, no drug use, or no intimation of drug use or anything. Yeah, it was a real weird hodgepodge of stuff they didn't want shown in comics on the assumption that it was all little kids reading it.
But yeah, but I vaguely remember early parts of the 70s, because like I said, I think I remember that's when all of a sudden we start seeing Frankenstein popping up in Marvel Comics.
Tomb of Dracula.
Yes.
Werewolf by Night. Marvel leaned into it pretty stronger than DC did at the time. And in some ways, Marvel had always kind of like fiddled with that, because Doctor Strange kind of almost went into that area.
Yes.
60s, but it was magic, so you could say that it wasn't the same as like horror. It was mysticism as opposed to. And the Warren magazines got away with it because they were black and white, and they were magazines. They weren't comic books. As long as it wasn't published in color or a comic book format, you could have whatever you wanted in them.
Wow. Because I remember reading an issue of, actually, I remember more the visual of, I think, Swamp Thing issue number 2, the Patchwork Man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
the one that I think is number 3 is the one that brought me in, which was the werewolf. Where we got to see Bernie Wrightson's interpretation of a werewolf for the first time. And it was a revelation for me. I had always been a Wolfman fan, a werewolf movie fan. But up until that point, all the due to budget constraints and technological issues in terms of like makeup and special effects.
Yeah.
It all, you watch a werewolf movie, and it was very obviously, for the most part, a guy in a suit, with hair glued on his face and fangs in his mouth, fake fangs in his mouth. I mean, you knew it. You had to have decent lighting to be able to pull it off. But you didn't have any of those constraints in the comics. And what Bernie showed in Swamp Thing was literally a humanoid wolf standing on hind legs. I mean, it literally an amalgamation of more wolf than man, but and it was like, yes, this is the werewolf I've always wanted to see. And that hooked me for good. And in fact, I just finished writing an appreciation for Bernie in a book that's coming out. I think it's been kick-started right now. I can't tell you the name of it. Most of the tributes are drawings and stuff like that. I turned in a little since I ended up writing Swamp Thing,
Mm-hmm.
that's how Bernie Wrightson's artwork was incredibly influential to me and led me into being a writer and being in comics. And it was a combination of that issue with Bernie, that issue of Swamp Thing, and also the I think it's Eerie, which has the story Jennifer in it, written by Bruce Jones and drawn by him.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite, and that was also, they also got to understand at that time, was also the underground comics movement.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And a lot of, and it was like divided into two categories. That you had the more political type cartoon, underground cartoons, like stuff with Zap and with
Yes.
counterculture,
Mm-hmm.
with Robert R. Crumb and
Yeah.
Sheldon and Dave Sheridan and stuff like that. And then you had the other, and then there was the horror undergrounds, which were kind of like a modern rebirthing of the EC comics that where Bernie came up through.
Yeah.
Bernie, Jim Starlin, and Richard Corbin.
Mm-hmm.
They all came up through that. And Eerie and Creepy were grabbing these guys up and running with them.
Yes.
And that's how I got to learn about underground comics.
Mm-hmm.
and EC comics, and basically I was getting a history on the hidden history of comics at that
Yes.
time.
Oh.
Except I may have been alive, but I wasn't cognizant of. I was when EC bit the dust, I was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so my earliest, I was like maybe 4 or 5 when Marvel really started hit the ground running with Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
And so it took a lot, what I knew is what I knew. And of course, you just had the triumph, the ever existing triumvirate of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Who had been around for decades at that point. So.
Oh yes. Yeah.
So.
Sorry, now I'm just going to continue on. You also were the first female writer to, and when we're talking about the black and white comic, Vampirella.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, I was the first woman to write Vampirella, who at that time was celebrating her 45th anniversary.
Uh-huh.
She's now turned 50.
Mm-hmm.
There's been several women since then. In fact, this weekend, I'm going up to Woodstock, Georgia, here in about 100 and something miles away from here, to a friend of mine's comic book store, Dr. No's Comics and Books, I think. And there'll be a few creators there, including my friend Christina Linzer, Christina Deeks Linzer, who Michael Linzer's wife.
Oh yes.
Dawn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she wrote Vampirella for about 6-7 issues, I think. So she followed me in the Vampirella writing area.
That is so cool. And then also too, you wrote you're also the first female writer for Army of Darkness, Furious Road, that came out in.
Well, just for Army of Darkness. I mean, Army of Darkness changes every. It's kind of like a mini series. A series of mini series as opposed to an actual title. It's like they rotate tires on a regular basis, and I proposed that, and Furious Road was my chance at it, and we did. That was about 6-7 years ago.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then also too, for IDW back in 2015, you adapted your novel Sunglasses After Dark into
the reprint. That was the hardcover updated and corrected edition.
Mm-hmm.
The Sunglasses actually adapted Sunglasses After Dark with artist Stan Shaw for Glenn Danzig's erotic publications back in the 90s, from 95 to 97. And we had a chance to get it republished at IDW, and Stan, since we couldn't afford to buy the color sets from Danzig, but we still had the rights to everything else to work, and we couldn't get the lettering done. We had to it had to be relettered, recolored, and I took the opportunity to also punch up some of the dialogue and change it so it read more like a graphic novel and less like a illustrated novel. And Stan taught himself digital coloring. And it took us three or 4 years to get the book out. Ever, but because of that. And then when it finally was released, it ended up getting held on the docks. It missed its Christmas window because it got held up on the docks in California, I think, due to a longshoreman's strike. So it missed getting into the stores. So a lot of people didn't even know it existed. But it's an amazing piece of work. It's an amazing, Stan did an amazing job. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Find it. It's out of print physically, but you can get it through. You can buy it from IDW digitally, and I guess through Comixology as well. Although I know Amazon's managed to really screw up Comixology recently, so I don't know what that situation is. But it's the adaptation of my first novel about a female punk vampire / vampire slayer. She has issues. That's usually how I describe it. She has issues. So
now, I'm just gonna off the cuff. So going back, so I know the Sunglasses After Dark. How many books did you write for that series?
Right now, there's let's see, there's Sunglasses After Dark, In the Blood, Painted Black, A Dozen Black Roses, Darkest Heart. Those are the 5 novels, and there's a short story collection called Dead Roses for a Blue Lady.
Oh, okay.
Also, I've been working on a long delayed sequel called Kill City, because I'm having trouble finding a publisher willing to pay advance on it, because basically Twilight destroyed that market. Trying to, it's a vampire novel. Is it young adult? No, we don't want it. And but I've gotten about halfway through Kill City over the last 8 or 9 years, and I'm still working on it. I've had my Patreon, if people are interested on my Patreon, they can read it if they join. What I've published so far, I've got about 100 pages of it done. And then so that's that, along with the graphic novel. So it comprises the entire Sonya Blue universe, so to speak.
I'm just going to jump right in. Do you want to promote your Patreon page and your social media pages?
It's patreon.com, Nancy A. Collins.
Okay.
All one word, Nancy A. Collins. And I have a Twitter, which is Twitter at Nancy Collins. It's not verified or anything like that, but just look for my header. It's a header that has Swamp Thing on it. So if you're looking for Nancy A. Collins, you'll see Swamp Thing. That's me. And then there's I have a Facebook page that I don't really do much on anymore, because I really don't like what Facebook has been doing. So you can find me there
Mhm.
as well, under Nancy A. Collins. But it's I have a personal page and I have a like page, a fan page.
Yeah.
But I don't do much on that
Mhm.
anymore, because and also every time I post something, somehow they manage to find some way of like restricting my account because I don't suffer fools lightly.
Mhm.
So once you start getting on their radar,
Mhm.
it's hard to get off of it.
Ugh.
But um, and just the whole political, I don't like being deliberately prodded to
Mhm.
respond to stuff um, that's going to aggravate me and then get me banned.
Mhm.
Point of that.
Mhm.
What is the point of that, folks?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have, and I may end up leaving Twitter relatively soon for the same reason, but I'm looking into other forms of social media such as Mastodon. I've just recently opened an account at Mastodon, but I haven't posted much there.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those things where I don't understand the point of diminishing returns on people. And social media, social media was, is well and fine as long as people know how to behave.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, don't come into my house and take a dump on my living room carpet.
Mhm.
Because that's basically what it amounts to.
Yeah. Because basically, it's just bottom line. Its bottom line is respect both ways. So
Yeah. Well, you have to maintain. You have to be good at controlling your feed.
Yes.
Just like it's like I'm just amazed at how many guys treat Facebook as if it's a bar where they can just come sidling up to you and, hey, baby.
Yeah.
What? Do I need you? Yes. So it's like,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, these are all things, first world problems, I guess.
I'm sorry, Nancy. I'm going to continue on. Are you so sorry about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's fine. That's fine.
All right. So where did you grow up? Because I know right now you're in Macon, Georgia, correct?
Yes, I'm not from here. Originally I grew up in Arkansas,
Mm-hmm.
in Arkansas, and I've lived all over the Eastern Seaboard, and I think I've lived as far as Denver, as far west as I got. But I've lived in Memphis, Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans for a bit, quite
Yes.
a while, New York City,
Mm-hmm.
Denver. I was living in Pennsylvania for a while, Atlanta extensively.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably lived in Georgia longer than anywhere uh, else besides where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I've bounced around quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
over the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I'm originally from Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Not the Ozarks. I'm from the Mississippi River Delta. I grew up in the Bayou country, which, in fact, I'm probably the only person to write Swamp Thing who actually grew up in swamp country.
Yes.
So
Yes, I remember, I think one of the interviews, that some of the information I got from various interviews is, when you wrote the Swamp Thing, I remember, I think, because when you wrote the Swamp Thing, you were living in New Orleans at that time. Was that correct?
I was living in New Orleans. Yeah, I lived in New Orleans from 81 to 91,
Mm-hmm.
or early 92.
So yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I was there for over 10 years.
mm-hmm. So because and I'm just gonna, for the listeners, I got that information from.
I was there from 82 to 92. That's it, exactly. living in Memphis in '81. So
and because I remember I got that little bit of information from an interview that you did last year, the YouTube podcast Comic by Perch.
yes.
I remember you mentioned that. So I just thought that was pretty amazing that, you know, when you wrote The Swamp, you know how the swamp is, and, you know, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know I know how. Yeah, I grew up being taught to look where I walk,
Yes.
because you know, that vine might be a water moccasin,
Ugh.
that frog might be an alligator,
Yes.
or that rock might be a snapping turtle.
Mm-hmm.
You just, you know, you can appreciate beauty, but always make sure you know where you're walking.
Yeah.
And also just, you know, always, you know, like my childhood, I basically was just, my parents might as well just have dipped me in DDT,
Mm-hmm.
the mosquitoes and everything, you know, just spray off on you.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know, like Axe body spray.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But you send your kids out, send your kids out to play in the backyard, and maybe they'll come home with malaria. Who knows? So
Oh, the good old days of the late
old
60s,
days,
early 70s, right?
yeah.
You know.
Back when we like to think that nothing was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and please, I'm not being sarcastic or anything, but I mean, you know, because like I grew up in the 70s. I mean, I'm a latchkey. I remember I was a latchkey kid. You know, it's like, you know, 8, 9 years old, come home. You know, my mom was working, so I had, you know, open the door, make sure you don't talk to strangers. You know, sit down in front of the TV, watch. You know, so.
Yeah, I get people who go, oh yeah, the '70s, that was absolutely the good old days, like the '70s, and I was like, you mean like during Watergate and the rise of the modern serial killer, like, you know, because that was like, you know, like the Hillside Strangler
God.
and Charlie Manson and BTK and all that. It's like that's, you know, that's my memory. That's a lot of my memories of the '70s. Oh yeah, that and the Patty Hearst kidnapping.
Oh my God, that's right. Sorry, listeners, we're not getting too political, but we're just kind of reminiscing. That's all it is. Because
yeah, it's just memory. It's just memory.
yeah, it's just because I still remember.
Paul Getty, the third kidnapping too, about that time.
That one. It vaguely sounds familiar, but I remember watching a news report. Now I don't know if it was a year afterwards or anything, but Kent State. Remember that?
Yeah, Kent State. It's in Vietnam was going on too.
Yeah.
It's like, the good old days.
Yeah. Or I remember my parents were driving me to a beach, and I remember listening on the radio. And again, listeners, I'm sorry, we're going down memory lane. But
but my grandmother, when people wanted to tell her about the good old days of the Depression, and she was like,
but I remember when Nixon announced his resignation.
Yeah, I remember. We were watching TV. We watched it.
You know, but yeah.
Let's get on that helicopter and fly the hell off. Yeah. Yeah, I remember all that. And that's the difference in being a teenager during that time, as a little kid. You know, you know, some of it you remember. It's like I vaguely remember the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't remember how the adults reacted to it that well, except they were upset.
Mm-hmm.
That's my knowledge of it. So.
All right, sorry, Nancy. I'm going to move on.
All right.
Okay, so listeners, so as we talked about, you know, like Nancy grew up, you know, in like the 60s and 70s. Now Nancy, you already talked about, you know, some of the first comics that you read. I wanted to ask you, what kind of books did you read growing up?
Oh, my family was very encouraging of literacy. My great grandmother was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
We had teachers in the family. We still have teachers in the family. My kid's sister was a teacher for 30 years. my niece graduates this month in just a couple of days, actually, and she'll be a teacher.
Oh, okay.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. And so it runs in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up reading, stuff like Dr. Seuss.
Mm-hmm.
The basic, like all the basics, like P.W. Eastman, like Go Dog Go and Are You My Mother?
Mm-hmm.
All the Dr. Seuss. My grandfather actually collected Dr. Seuss from like back in the day, from back in the 40s. He had stuff that went back into before he was writing for children. So he had old stuff, and so I had a lot of that weird stuff like Flat Stanley,
Oh, yeah.
which was a story about this little boy who ran through the house. He would always slam the door,
Mm-hmm.
and he slammed the door one day, and the shipper fell on him and squashed him flat, but he was still alive. And so he was Flat Stanley, and some of it was beneficial, like he could like go under doors without having to open them and just slide them under the door.
Mm-hmm.
He decided it wasn't that great when he got caught up in a window shade. But yeah, stuff like that, it was the great. And then when I started, I taught myself to read at the age of 3 or 4.
Uh-huh.
Because I got bored waiting for my mother or my grandparents to find time to read to me. So I taught myself to read and write. And then I started reading stuff like E.B. White, like Charlotte's Web, and Madeline's A Wrinkle in Time, Little. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was probably the first. Charlotte's Web and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and A Wrinkle in Time were probably the first books I remember reading over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom had always been a science fiction fan, and so I kind of inherited some of her books and started reading, some older 1950s science fiction, 1940s science fiction. I moved into that, and my grandfather was a horror fan, and he was an Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. He was a big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. He had a huge collection of like original pulp magazines with Argosy, with like the original Tarzans and Joan Carter from Mars stuff. So I had all that. So my mother's attitude is, I don't care what she reads as long as she's reading, because there were so many other kids and adults around us in Arkansas who were illiterate, who just didn't read.
Yeah.
My uncle Bo, my dad's older brother, he was a big Western fan. My grandfather, my mom's grandfather was too. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather was a Max Brand fan, and my uncle was a Louis L'Amour. So they would get into arguments as to who was the better Western writer, and so that was. So I grew up with that, and so I started reading things like that, and I started just branching out more into first short story collections before getting into. But a lot of the short story collections back when I was a kid, Alfred Hitchcock had a series of anthologies for younger readers. I can't remember what it's called. I think it was called Alfred Hitchcock Juniors, and they were like they were literally Twilight Zone and Night Gallery level writers and stories. In fact, most of these stories in there showed up in Twilight Zone and Night Gallery. They had like Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch, some of the classics. It's like where I look, The Monkey's Paw, and Bram Stoker's ghost stories, E.R. James, a lot of classic Victorian era ghost stories and stuff like that.
Yes.
And Manly Wade Wellman, all these people from the pulp era as well.
Yes.
And I had access to those, and those were some of my favorites. And that's where and when I got a little bit older, where I could like read a novel from
Mhm.
one end to the other.
Yes.
More adult novels, I would recognize those names from being when I was a kid, and also from like watching Twilight Zone.
Hmm.
I'd go, oh, I saw this on Twilight Zone. I recognize this story, or Night Gallery.
Hmm.
And it took me a long time to get into Lovecraft because he's not really an easy read when you're a
Hmm.
kid. I was in high school before I really started getting into being able to read Lovecraft.
Hmm.
And by that time, I was also reading Stephen King,
Hmm.
and I'd been reading like Richard Matheson and Ray Bradbury and Robert Sheckley,
Hmm.
uh, Bob Silverberg,
Hmm.
uh, Isaac Asimov,
Hmm.
Sturgeon, um, all these, Zena Henderson, um, all these uh, writers from the 50s, 60s, like from anywhere from the 40s through the 60s, Harlan Ellison,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, and uh, all just kind of bubbled up. And then I discovered, like I said, through uh, then I discovered like Robert E. Howard
Hmm.
through,
Yeah.
and that led me actually. Robert E. Howard actually led me into reading Lovecraft,
Oh, okay.
because he was like the first other author to write a Lovecraft story, a Cthulhu Mythos story,
Oh.
and that was during Lovecraft's
Hmm.
lifetime. It was a collaboration they did.
Oh.
That introduced me to and then that's how I discovered the pulp writers and that whole, so it was all interconnected.
Yes.
And this was pre-internet, so you were kind of like stumbling around blind, groping around trying to find, and thank God for my local grocery store and drugstore, because their spinner racks of paperbacks and comics is
I
out.
remember.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and some of it ended up in the library too, but
Yes.
this I stumbled upon in the commercial space as
Hmm.
opposed to library.
Yeah.
And then so I slowly kind of got absorbed into it that way.
I'm gonna say, Nancy, I'm gonna be honest with you. I do remember books being on spinner racks, not comic books, but I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Back before you didn't have to go to a bookstore to find books.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
you have to go to a comic book store to find comics.
Hmm.
In fact, there were a handful of comic book stores back then in the entire country.
Hmm. Yes.
Most of them, they're in pool halls, bus stations, drugstores,
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Um, this is going to lead me to my next question. That's a perfect segue. So, Drew, the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast host, submitted this question. Do you remember going to your very first comic shop? Like that sold exclusively or just comics?
Um, Let me think. I think the very first one was Memphis Comics in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
There have been a couple of places that kind of sold comics that I'd wanted, but that was they had a little they were in a little corner of, they
Yeah.
were in head shops,
Hmm.
corner of it. The first one that was completely dedicated to it was this. It no longer exists. It was across the street from Memphis State University,
Hmm.
on Highland Avenue, and that was the first place where I had a pull list and whatever. And one of the other regulars was Jerry Lawler, the
Oh,
king of wrestling.
yes.
And and I've known Jerry for like 40 years. I haven't seen him in dog's years, but
Hmm.
he would come and get his comics there, and he would park his van out front, which very few people were allowed to park out front. They had a parking lot in the back, but Jerry was allowed to park his van out front, and he had a conversion van. And he's actually a pretty good artist too. He's very much in the style of like Buscema and John Buscema and
Yeah.
Frank Frazetta, and
Oh,
he had airbrushed his own van with the Conan the Death Dealer thing where
yes.
hitting on top of the mound of skulls with his
Yeah.
and the woman wrapped around his leg. He
Uh-huh.
instead of Conan's face, it was his. Yeah, Jerry had a sweet van. And he and I would talk Robert E. Howard and Conan and Solomon Kane and all that whenever I was there. So he's and I didn't even know he was a wrestler at the time. I just knew he was Jerry, the guy with the van with his face on it.
Nancy, that is so cool. That is such a cool story. That is so cool. Now I just want to mention this right now, listeners, if you, and Nancy too, if you hear big thunder, thunder behind, in the audio podcast right now, I'm going through a thunderstorm right now that just popped up. So
yeah, we had one last night.
Oh God. Yeah, I think yesterday there was a big storm system that hit the Big Island and Maui, and then I think what it did for part of one section in Maui, it basically washed out the road, so that's pretty bad. Yeah, so yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Nancy. So I'm going to continue on. So I know you mentioned about Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing, kind of got you kind of like gave you that spark to start writing. So how did your journey start writing novels? How did that get started?
Well, mainly because if you want to make any money as a writer, you got to write novels now. The days of being able to make a living writing short fiction are long gone. And if I could still make my living writing for pulp magazines, writing short stories, that's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy that. The slog of writing a novel is pretty grueling, and it's now becoming less and less financially feasible, since it used to be they'd pay you half up front, then half upon completion. Now they've divided it into thirds, where they pay you a third up front, a third when you turn it in, and a third on publication.
Sorry.
And they could always never publish it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's it's just it's becoming more and more untenable. But but I got involved. I got into writing novels.
Mm-hmm.
I became friends with, I became the pupil or protege, if you like, of a published writer named John Shirley, who is like one of the guys who invented cyberpunk.
Oh, okay.
He actually was the one who introduced William Gibson to his publisher.
Yes.
And which resulted in Neuromancer.
Mm-hmm.
And John was, like I said, one of the guys who invented cyberpunk. I mean, he got for Max Headroom. He most recently he did stuff for I'm blanking. One of the video game franchises, the one with the big daddies. Which one's that?
Oh.
The one that's underwater.
Oh,
God.
I'm not into video games. Sorry.
Pretty good game series. I'm completely blanking on it.
Mm-hmm.
He did that. He wrote, and he's he was also the co-screenwriter on The Crow.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And but yeah, he got his start in the 70s. I was a big fan of his work, and I started writing him. And then we met.
Mm-hmm.
He started basically tutoring me through the mail on how to write.
Mm-hmm.
And how to write novels. And when he felt I was suitable, and this was at the time when the cyberpunk was rising up, through him I got to meet Bruce Sterling, Bill Gibson, Luke Shiner, Rudy Rucker, K.W. Jeter.
Yes.
So I got to know all these guys, and originally I was trying to be a science fiction writer, like cyberpunk model. And then I realized I'm not good enough in the science. I'm just not good enough. I'm good enough at the writing, but not good enough at the science end of it. So, and at the same time, he was also doing horror work, and started motion me towards, this was when splatterpunk was starting to emerge. He started pushing me to do horror, and so I'd had this character that I created in high school and had written various stories for, and at one point had tried to do a black and white comic book with a friend of mine in New Orleans. This was back when like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles made the black and white comic boom.
Yes.
And he and I were going to try and launch this, and then he ended up getting a job working for Howard Chaykin on American Flag and left. And I just had this 6-issue script, and so I rewrote it to be a novel, and I showed it to John, and that was Sunglasses After Dark. Become Sunglasses After Dark.
Yeah. And
he said, "This is promising, but you need to," he basically was teaching, tutoring me through the mail on how to rewrite it and get it ready for proposal. And he said, and that's how I got it. And once he was satisfied, he introduced me to his editor over at Ben's Signet, or New American Library, which is England Random House. And I sent the first 3 chapters in outline, and they picked it up, and that's how it got. That's how I got published.
Wow.
And there we go. And and that was back in 1987, 88.
Yeah.
So.
And then I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So how did you get your start working in comics?
I got my start working in comics because I had a best-selling horror novel at the time, which was Sunglasses After Dark. And I was doing a lot of short story work. A lot of offers to do short story work, especially media tie-ins. And I've been approached to do by this guy at New Line Cinema to write a Freddy Krueger short story or novelette for a tie-in called series called Freddy's Sweetest Nightmares or something like that. And the editor on the book, over at St. Martin's, was Stuart Moore, who hated working on those books. He hated them, and but he and I ended up developing a pretty good rapport. And he left St. Martin to work as an editor at DC Comics and got Swamp Thing. They were looking to get a new creative team, and he approached me and said, "Would you be interested in doing that?" I said, "Oh boy, would I!" And and the reason he wanted pick me as because I was living in New Orleans at the time, and of all the writers who did stuff for him, I was the one he had to rewrite the least. I had to make the fewest corrections. So, and I worked fast. So he approached me, and I did a proposal, and I got the job, and we worked together for over 2 years.
That is nice.
And so yeah, it's not like no one can. It's like, well, how did you get into comics? Well, I don't know if you can follow my footsteps exactly.
Yeah.
This is how I got there. Because Freddy Krueger.
I'm going to ask you, how awesome was it to see your name on a comic book, like literally either on the newsstands or wherever how awesome was it to see it?
Well, it was awesome. Yeah, it felt like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I always kind of feel a certain amount of, oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
My name on comic book. Oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah. It's same with the Blade Runner one when they posted the cover of the first issue last month, and I went, "Oh yeah, that's my name up there. Oh wow." So yeah, and they don't feel the name the need to put Nancy on front of it now. It's just
Mhm. Yeah. Yes.
um, so but yeah, they always felt the need to make sure that my first name was on there.
Mhm.
Days and to let people know I was a woman.
Mhm.
So um, so but it's yeah, it's very rewarding, and it's and something I can point to. And
Mhm.
everything eventually ends up in my private archive, my
Mhm.
personal archive. So at least one copy.
Ah, that's nice. All right, so Nancy, this is the perfect segue when you start to talk about when you got, your first issue of Blade Runner. So, just for the listener, I'm just going to give them a little bit of background on Blade Runner Black Lotus, and please feel free to add anything. So now the first season is already out. It has 13 episodes, and it's on Adult Swim and Crunchyroll.
Yeah,
It is produced by Alcon Entertainment.
Alcanet,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Alcanet.
Alcanet Entertainment, and this is the company that also produced the Blade Runner 2049 movie as well.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I just watched the first couple of episodes of Blade Runner Black Lotus. May I ask you, what is Blade Runner the Black Lotus series about?
Well, it's a it's part of the larger Blade Runner
Mm-hmm.
series now, which I wasn't aware there was too much of it because
Yeah.
out of the movies, but apparently there've been animated series, and there's been uh, uh, some graphic novel series as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I got brought in. I was only aware of the movies and the novels. Like I said, that my friend K.W. Jeter wrote that are part of that. Um, and basically, it follows the story of um, a young woman who, yeah, I don't think I'm spoiling anything.
Oh
She's
yeah.
um, who finds herself in being used as a pawn uh, amongst the billionaires
Mm-hmm.
that run that world,
Mm-hmm.
and she's trying to figure out what if what she remembers is real or fake,
Mm-hmm.
and her purpose is, and why she was created, and how
Mm-hmm.
um, and what future she has, because she's um, like I think there's like she's a part of a new breed of replicant,
Mm-hmm.
or new model.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a whole lot I can tell you because I have an NDA on this,
Yeah.
but um, basically they're trying to expand her and make her a more uh, identifiable and relatable character, and utilize uh, the concept of the replicant.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think the one thing that the difference between 1981, 82 when
Something
Blade
like that. Yeah.
came out and
Mm-hmm.
now is
Yes.
that if you go back and watch Blade Runner,
Mm-hmm.
you realize the replicants aren't the bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
um, and and basically expand more on the replicant as a uh, metaphor
Yes.
for man's inhumanity to man,
Mm-hmm.
or man's tendency to mistreat those it deems as lessers,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
or inhuman, or
Mm-hmm.
unhuman, less than human.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I'm working on now, is expanding um, stories that are it's I wouldn't say it's an immediate sequel, but it's like shortly thereafter the events, within
Mm-hmm.
a month of the events, at the end of Blade Runner Black Lotus, the
Mm-hmm.
TV, the anime series.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it follows the character of Elle,
Mm-hmm.
the Black Lotus,
Mm-hmm.
going out into the desert to A, get away from Los Angeles and the people pursuing her, and B,
Mm-hmm.
try and find her place in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and what she is and isn't,
Yes.
and we're expanding on that. So, and it also, but it has a lot of action, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of lots of action in it, and set in the Blade Runner, and it also gives it a chance to like show what the world looks like outside of LA,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank
out
you.
in the desert, out in the Inland Empire, uh, and how people are struggling to get by, because outside of the mega cities,
Yes.
it's more like, it's like post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's either people living in Blade Runner mega cities, or they're out in the boonies where it's like Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the best way I can describe it, and without giving away too much.
Oh yeah, no, but that's going to be very interesting to see, because as you saw in one of my notes, and I'm going to say this because I was kind of, as you saw in one of my notes, I was kind of joking. It's like, it seems like, well, the two Blade Runner movies is always in Los Angeles, and it's always raining, or they'll say it's daytime and it still looks dark.
Yeah, that's due to global warming and all that. I mean, climate change is because LA generates this field where it's just like raining, and it's like nasty rain too. It's
Mhm.
not like good rain. It's like
Yeah.
it's like and then once you get outside of that area,
Mhm.
it's everything. We've ruined our resources.
Mhm.
Yeah, you get to see that in the sequel to the sequel to Blade Runner. Where,
Mhm.
Bautista is is a worm farmer, because that's where all our protein comes from now.
Ah, okay.
Having to raise worms for a living, as opposed
Mhm.
because we can't support you know livestock,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
so and I would say uh, the Blade Runner universe. It's not that different from. It's a little bit more technologically advanced, but I would compare it to being somewhat informed by like the Soylent Green.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Make Room by Harry Harrison.
Mhm.
It's like overpopulation,
Yes.
and people are like, and it's kind of like people fleeing the world to go into the colonies because we've made it so unlivable. Like fleeing the cities for the suburbs.
Mhm.
So it's there's a lot of interesting metaphors to be used there. So the parallels,
Mhm.
like science fiction is always the future using the future to talk about what the hell's going on now.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Um, how much research did you do for preparing for this mini series? Like,
Well,
mhm.
they sent me a bunch of links and everything, but most of it uh, consisted of me rewatching both movies,
Mhm. Yeah.
both action movies, and then watching the Black Lotus series. And the thing is, long before the Black Lotus series aired, they'd sent me the scripts for that.
Mhm.
So I actually knew the story and where it was going, the characters
Mhm.
and all that. But then seeing it, and reading it's one thing, but seeing it realized is another thing,
Mhm.
and giving you a little, little bit of touches here and there,
Mhm.
and going back and looking. They also sent me some information about the timeline
Mm.
as to the development of the replicants,
Mhm.
and although there's still a lot of gaps, because this was all kind of created in reverse.
Mhm.
Because let's face it, Blade Runner probably wasn't intended to be a franchise.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
First off, when the first movie came out,
Yeah.
um, so it's a lot of it's done in reverse. I'd actually read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep
Mm-hmm.
back in the 80s,
Yes.
um, late 70s, early 80s. I read quite a bit of Philip K. Dick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I try to keep it, despite everyone, oh, that's Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. I go, no, it's Philip K. Dick's
Yes.
Androids Dream, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And I try to keep one foot in, I try to keep Phil's intentions in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I never met Phil, but we had mutual friends.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So and that it's more. I'm supposed to be. I don't want to dishonor Phil's intentions with his work.
Mm-hmm. Because one of the mutual friends that you and Philip K. Dick, it's KW.
KW, yeah.
Because,
Also, George Alec Effinger was another mutual friend. And I mean, I mean, all these science fiction writers, they all knew each other back in the day. They would go to science fiction conventions together. They all knew each other. But KW was Phil's protege. And George was an old friend of Phil's from like writers writers workshops.
Yeah.
So that's, like I said, George is the one who told me that Phil had died.
Mm-hmm.
George and I were dating at the time, and he would say, "Oh God, Phil just died. He just got off the phone with his editor, the sheriff editor at Phantom, and Phil had died." So, it's I try to keep that in mind.
No, yes. I'm just asking. Did you ever read any of KW's sequels to Blade Runner?
No, not his sequels to Blade Runner.
Okay.
I have almost all his original novels, and he's sent it to me. I mean, I was a huge KW Junior fan, still am. I have all his stuff like Dr. Adder and Blood Money, not Blood Money. It's Phil. Dr. Adder, The Glass Hammer. His horror. He also did some amazing horror novels like Mantis and The Night Man. Jeter's like one of the great science fiction writers of the late 20th century, early 20th. but unfortunately, like a lot of us, he has to your original work doesn't get nearly as much attention as your media tie-in stuff. He was like one of the guys who invented steampunk.
Sorry, he's one
of the guys who invented steampunk.
Oh, okay.
One of his first novels was Morlock Night, which is about, like centuries later, a century after the events of the time machine, the Morlocks reappear in London. They're coming up out of the ground. And all their technology is still based on stuff that existed in the Victorian age.
Yes.
Because it was all steam-driven stuff. And he also wrote a novel called Infernal Machines, which is also probably that they came out in the 80s. That was also one of the first steampunk novels. Wow. He's a creative guy. I would say he was one of the cyberpunk guys. He's also one of the innovators of steampunk.
My next question I'm going to ask you. So how did you get this awesome gig?
Doing Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Because one of the guys who works for Alcanet, Jeff Connor, is an old friend of mine. I've known him, probably almost 40 years. He used to, I used to buy books from him back when he was publishing horror novels he had a specialty horror press called Scream Press. Would print stuff by like Ramsey Campbell and Michael McDowell and Stephen King. And a friend of mine provided covers for him, artist named J.K. Potter, who was doing what we would call Photoshop.
Mhm.
Photoshop. And he would actually physically do photo collage to create these Lovecraftian scenarios.
Mhm.
And of course, that was a good 20 years before Photoshop ever appeared.
Yeah.
And I got to know Jeff from buying books from him, and then he went into publishing. He worked for IDW for a while,
Mhm.
and then he's been with Alcanet, and he and I been friends since. And then he thought I would be a natural fit, since I'm known for strong female characters.
Mhm.
So and so that's what we did. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. If you really want me, I'll do it. And that's how we are where we are right now.
Mhm.
And I'm getting ready to do issue 4. I just turned in the script to issue 3. I'm breaking down issue 4 right now.
Mhm.
Issue 1, in fact, I just finished correcting the lettering on issue 1, which will come out June 1st.
Mhm.
And then issue 2 will come out early July.
Mhm.
Yeah, since that's like the week of 4th of July, I'm not
Yes.
really sure. But I'm working with a Mexican artist named Enid Balam, who is a man.
Mhm.
I've had to explain that to a couple of people once. Like, so is you and this Enid woman? It's like, no, it's like Linda Mulder.
Uh-huh.
And doing it again. But he's Enid's doing some amazing work on this. It's very, very, very good.
Mhm.
Makes me think of it. Makes me kind of reminds me of like 2000 AD, classic 2000 AD work. And for those of you old enough to remember 2000 AD, which is where Judge Dredd comes from. But very good artwork, very good artist. And of course, there's going to be like scads of variant covers on this thing, giving up, counting. And but I'm having a good time working on it.
Oh, that's great. I'm just going to ask, do you want to give any other shout outs to your creative team?
Just Enid. I mean, I can't remember the name of the letterer or the ink. But I think Enid's actually doing a lot of inking.
Okay.
But yeah, he lives in Mexico City, and this may be an incentive for me to finally get up on my ass and go to Mexico City. I've always wanted to do that. He lives apparently in this little artist community.
Oh, okay.
There, a whole block of neighborhood that's nothing but people who work in the comics industry there.
That's nice.
I'd love to go there and hang out, get some real Mexican food. And apparently they got some of the best Chinese food on the face of the earth in Mexico City.
Oh.
Yeah, because that's where the train tracks ended.
Oh.
And they I thought, okay, well that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So but yeah, I've been wanting to check out Mexico City for a while, so maybe go there, go get myself some Luco Libres. So, yeah. Some Lucadors.
All right, I'm gonna move on, Nancy.
All right.
I know you did you participated in the Kolchak Kickstarter.
Yes.
How big of a fan are you of the original TV series?
Oh, I was a huge fan. I was huge. That was a very pivotal moment for me. There's a few things, and it's. I'm also kind of, I've had all these weird interconnections later on in life with things that influenced me, like getting to become good friends with both Lynn Wine and Bernie Wrightson, and working on Swamp Thing. And
yes,
in this case, when I first saw The Night Stalker on
Yes.
television, when it was, and this was like back in the day, it was like one of the very first ABC TV movies of the week,
Yes.
and it was closer to like a legitimate movie
Yes.
than the TV movies that later came out. Um, uh, the producer on it was Dan Curtis, best known for being the producer on the Dark Shadows TV series.
Oh, okay.
And he later did other stuff as well, but that's probably what he's best known for, was doing Dark Shadows. And the screenwriter on it was Richard Matheson.
Yes.
And I already kind of, and that was like Matheson ended up being very influential. But in fact, I'm in the process of writing an afterword to a special edition, special collector's edition of Hell House, Richard Matheson, that his son asked me to write, because I actually wrote the only authorized prequel to Hell House about 10, 12 years ago. Matheson approved of, and so that was, so I'm Matheson being involved in that, being a writer on Twilight Zone, being a writer, having written a couple of episodes of Star Trek, being stuff, being a writer on Night Gallery,
Yes.
and then having been a screenwriter on several of my favorite horror movies in the 60s and 70s, like Pit and the Pendulum and The Raven, a lot of those Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe movies, and in particular, he did the screenplay for The Devil Rides Out, aka The Devil's Bride, with Christopher Lee, where one of the few times Christopher Lee plays a hero.
Yeah.
And that was like one of my favorite Hammer films. It's probably one of the best Hammer films ever done. And so I always, the fact that, that was a stamp of quality as far as I was concerned. If Richard Matheson was involved, then yeah, I'll watch this. And that was roughly about the same time I had read the I Am Legend.
Yes.
Which at that time had been re-released as The Omega Man.
Yeah.
To cash in on the Charlton Heston movie.
Yes.
And that completely blew my mind on what is and isn't a vampire, and what isn't a vampire story. And so there were several things going on at once. That, and I'm getting into like Tomb of Dracula, also hugely influential. But also The Night Stalker, which is like taking the concept of the vampire, the classic vampire, and reimagining it in a modern setting.
Yes.
And how people would deal with this, and the reality of it, and that was actually a really, at the time, now I was like 11, 12. That was a scary TV show. It still holds up. It still holds up as being creepy and as a police procedural. And I have to explain to people, so what was this Night Stalker? I said, well, you remember the old man from Christmas Story? Well, he was a vampire hunter.
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, and the thing is, when I first watched that, what I knew Darren McGavin for is having been Mike Hammer.
Oh my God,
he was the first Mike Hammer. The Mike Hammer TV show back in the early 60s. He had a reputation of kind of being a tough guy, scrapper, as opposed to, he's just a reporter. Yeah, but he was like a two-fisted, a scrappy guy. And that was a hugely influential thing on me. And then I went and read the novel it was based on. And by Jeff Rice, who, to my knowledge, has not done anything else. I think he's dead now. But that was highly influential.
Yes.
And then I love that. I love the character of Kolchak. I was less enamored of the sequel, The Night Strangler. And the the series itself.
Yeah.
That I love watching. I love the character interaction between him and the other guys in his newsroom, and I mean the stories were kind of like that, but you could see the template for the X-Files there because that's what Chris Carter said he used. The monster of the week, and it was kind of uneven, but there were some really good ones in there. But you know, Darren McGavin made it worth watching because he owned that character. He put his heart and soul into it, and I loved his, like I said, his connection with, you know, especially the little old lady.
Oh yes,
she was so sweet, and you could tell he just like, you know, they had a great relationship off camera too, and his relationship with his editor, and, and all of that. It combined all the elements of what they call the newsroom drama. And I always thought I would love to have seen if a crossover between it and Lee Grant.
Oh my God.
That would have been amazing.
I remember, because I remember Lou Grant from Mary Tyler Moore Show, but then when it switched over to a drama, I still remember that too.
Oh yeah, that was a great show. It was a great. I was thinking, how is this going to transfer over? And it worked perfectly because he was a newsman.
Yeah.
And to the point where you kind of forgot about the Mary Tyler Moore connection.
Yes.
Because they never really went back to it. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen Ed Asner fighting vampires or werewolves or whatever. Because you know, him and Carl teaming up. Because you know, it would have been great. So. And Lou Grant's a great show. It's a great show. It won all kinds of Emmys and well deserved. And you know, we lost him and Betty White within just a couple of months of each other.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, and the guy played. You know, like we lost half of like the old Mary Tyler Moore Show within like a year.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, but Ed was. You know, I would have loved to have seen him. And so it was a real easy sell to get me on board. To get me on, you're going to do coaching? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So before I continue on with the, you know, a couple more questions around Kolchak, because I saw on James, I'm going to pronounce James's last name as best I can, Aquilone.
Aquilone?
Yeah, Aquilone. He posted on his Twitter feed a page from the Swamp Thing issue that you had a certain quote unquote reporter do a cameo.
Oh yeah. I snuck Carl into Swamp Thing. Yeah. Now come on, buddy, you got your $10 worth. Come on. Yeah. Okay. But what about? Yeah, come on, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's harassing Abby, bless her heart, but. You know, what about these questions about the disappearance of Senator Ben Barron, and what about your supposed husband? Swamp Thing is like, come on, you know, get him out of here. But yeah, that is very much the Carl Kolchak bugging the hell out of Abby on a date in the French Quarter. After she leaves her husband, Swamp Thing. Yeah, it's always fun to be able to sneak things like that in. So.
Now I'm gonna ask, how did you team up with Warwick Johnson?
Well, he was appointed to me. They basically, that's usually what editors and publishers do. They pair you up, and he paired me up with James paired me up with Warwick, who is he's still working on it right now. He didn't like what he was doing. He got most of the way through it, then didn't like how it was coming out, and went back to redo it. So I can't really tell you anything more than he wanted to do the story justice. That's
understandable. So yeah. All right. So
still working on it.
But I'm gonna say I cannot wait to get my Kickstarter later this year. I cannot wait. I ordered the hardcover with Jerry Ordway's cover.
I should have worn my. It's in the laundry. I should have worn my Kolchak Batman logo T-shirt.
Oh yes, I
You can't
saw
see it
that.
anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. But yeah, they said I said, hey, can I get one of those T-shirts? And they went, sure. You know, what's your size? And they sent me one. So yeah, I got the one with the Batman logo, um,
Hmm.
Kolchak on it. So yeah, yeah, Kolchak. Yeah, he could. I'd like to see him team up with Doctor Strange. I mean,
Yes.
he could team up with almost any of the supernatural characters in comics. I mean,
Hmm.
really, like I would mind seeing him, you know, square off against Dracula.
Oh yes.
It might not last long, but uh, or at least there's any number of characters. I really I would have loved to have seen a crossover with him and the characters from the X Files.
Oh yes.
In fact, my story hints that a couple of characters in the background at this thing
Hmm.
are Mulder and Scully. You don't see them; they're in the far background.
Yes.
But you get the hint that that's what's going on.
Hmm.
So I make a reference to the Millennium Group in it as well.
Oh my God.
Well, since he played Frank Black's father,
I forgot about that.
yeah,
Ah.
yeah, Darren McGavin was Frank Black's father.
Oh, okay.
Lance Henriksen is.
Yeah.
I follow him on Facebook,
Hmm.
and eventually I'll have to like send him something from the artwork when that comes.
Hmm.
Because I know he just adored Darren. So
Yeah.
City, but yeah, it's like no. Although the parallel to Carl in X Files was the character played by Charles Nelson Riley.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that
Um.
was that was an amazing turn from him. I'd never seen him serious before,
Yes.
and he was
Yeah.
amazing in that.
Because that was what was it? It was something like
Yeah, he played that character twice.
yeah, Joe Chung on Doomsday or something,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
that
yeah.
was an X Files episode.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I think it was like one of the last things he did before he died.
Yeah, and then I think, and I know he did an episode in on Millennium as well
Yeah,
too.
yeah. The same character, tied
Yes.
to the. Well, that's a whole weird thing is that apparently Millennium and X Files also exist in the same universe as Law and
Yes.
Order and
Yes.
and Homicide. Uh,
Richard Belzer.
It's because Munch showed
Yes.
in X Files.
Yes. And then I remember because I remember reading this story and I can't remember who came up with the idea, but they wanted to do one of those because during the 90s, Picket Fence was on the series.
Yeah, yeah.
I've never watched it, but I know the two producers of the series were talking about doing like having Fox Mulder pop in Picket Fence, but they
Yeah.
couldn't. It was supposed to be some strange thing about sheep being killed or something.
Well, one of the characters and one of the actors in Picket Fence back then was Ray Walston,
Oh yeah.
my favorite Martian.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, all these things that kind of interconnected and have fun with them. Um, yeah, so just have a little fun with it. Don't take it seriously. Don't try to, as Mystery Science tells you, you know, don't really try and think about it. Just relax. Enjoy
Yeah.
the show. Just relax.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the guys who invented Mystery Science Theater also created Freaks and Geeks.
Ah, okay.
So
Hmm.
it's all it's everything and everything and everything and anywhere all at the same time. So
Hmm.
we're all it's all interconnected.
Yeah. All right, Nancy, I'm going to slowly wrap things up.
All right.
All right. So now I know you lived in New Orleans, like you mentioned, like from I think like 82 to 92. Now, did you ever go to Anne Rice's house during Halloween? Because if I
No,
remember correctly, Didn't she open her house during Halloween to her fans?
I don't really know. I've met her once. She
Uh-huh.
would have, they would have this, what they call the vampire ball
Mm-hmm.
at the Collins Hotel,
Okay.
St. Charles, which is where I got married to my first husband, by the
Mhm.
way. And I attended that once with my publisher and editor.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to get her to give me an endorsement,
Mhm.
and didn't really go over well. So
Mm-hmm.
I know that she would have the vampire ball at the Collins Hotel.
Yeah.
At least that time they did. I don't know what she did later.
Oh, okay.
I didn't really know her that well at all.
Mhm.
So I just met her once.
Okay.
I think she just moved back to New Orleans from San Francisco at that point.
I'm going to ask you, the next question is, what is the most fun or exciting thing that you love, either working in comics or writing novels or short stories?
Thing that I love. But I always find it fascinating in comics to see my words interpreted,
Mhm.
how other creative people interpret my words through visually. So I'm always fascinated to see how my scripts emerge from other people.
Mhm.
I find that there's certain to see my. It's one thing to write,
Mhm.
and I see what I see in my head,
Mhm.
but I never know how other people interpret my words until I see something from the artist,
Mhm.
and then suddenly how I saw it is how they see it,
Mhm.
or how they see it is it replaces to a certain extent how I saw it.
Mhm.
So it is a visual medium.
Mhm.
But like I said, I find it fascinating to
Mhm.
have that level,
Okay.
and it's always rather gratifying.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you a couple fun questions. Favorite convention moment, whether it's a fan or as a creator?
Um, um, One of the more memorable convention moments uh, was going to San Francisco, San Diego Comic Con for the first time, and I just taken over writing Swamp Thing, but the comics hadn't come out yet,
Mhm.
and so I was, and Neil was there signing,
Mhm.
and Neil and I had become friends like a year or so before,
Mhm.
and but I didn't want to assume anything, so I just
Mhm.
stood in line to get my comics signed.
Mhm. Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah.
Then when I walked up, and Neil looks up and goes, "Nancy, what are you doing standing in line?" Well, I didn't want to. And he just jumped up and he ran around the table, hugged me, dragged me right behind the table,
That's
and
nice.
sat me down next to him while he was signing. And we continued talking. And and all these people, who the hell is this woman?
Yeah.
So, um, and so that was a great moment. And then later that same day,
Mhm.
I met Bernie Wrightson for the first time,
Yes.
and he embraced me wholeheartedly. He had, you know, I'm so glad we finally got a woman writing this. It's about time.
Mhm.
I've read your novel. I've read Sunglasses After Dark. You're going to do great. I love everything that you've done. And he said, "Come on!" And he grabbed me. He goes, "Come on, let's go to a party. We're going to a room party."
Mhm.
And we ended up going to this hotel room. You know, it's like a suite, like a big suite.
Mhm.
And Frank Miller's there.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
Grant Morrison, I believe.
Mhm.
Jim Starlin.
Mhm.
Howard Chaykin.
Mhm.
Um, Bernie,
Mm-hmm.
and Neil was there,
Mm-hmm.
and he basically introduced me to everybody, and we were all just there partying, talking, shooting the shit as creators. And I was like I said, my comics had not come out yet, so I was just like a fly on the wall. I've seen pictures from that room party. You don't see me in them,
Mm-hmm.
but I was there, and I remember this was taken, and it was quite humbling. It was quite humbling, but at the same time, I felt like, yeah, okay, these are my people, these are my peeps. Here I am, and I managed to stay friends with most of them, or at least not be active enemies.
Yeah.
And it was a very good time. One of those, your first convention as professional before when people in the industry know who you are, but before the fans do, you'll never recapture that.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get it. You'll never recapture it. The closest thing I can compare it to is this. Ringo Starr was once asked, "What was your best time as a Beatle?" And he said, "It was before our first album came out, when we were recording in London, and we could go anywhere we wanted to go and do what we wanted to do. If me and George wanted to take a hansom cab ride, a horse cab ride to the city, we could do it. We could go into nightclubs, and we could be left alone. We were having a great time, and we were able to, and we didn't have to worry about being the Beatles." And I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, man." Where you can actually go to a convention and not have to worry about being you. Where you're just you. You don't have to be the you with the finger quotes around it. You don't. I could just be Nancy Collins. I could just be Nancy. I didn't have to be Nancy A. Collins. And not that I'm, and Lord, Neil and I have talked. Neil has transcended into a completely different level of fame. But I watched that happen to him, where he, and I really wish I could go back to just being able to hang in the bar.
Yeah.
You guys, and just talk and shoot the shit and not worry about everything. And I said, yeah, I can understand that. So, but yeah, it's an interesting, little sliver of time, and one you can never roll back and get again.
Yes.
So savor it when you got it, folks.
I have to say, that's really awesome what Neil did for you to come, like you said, my comic hasn't come out. I'm going to just stand in line. I know Neil, but I don't want to just.
I'm not going to push my way to the heaven.
Yeah. Again, you're just being respectful.
I do it now because I've known him for 30 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm old. I can't wait in line. He's going to give out,
But I think that that was so cool that he came around. He goes, "What are you doing in line? Come on!" And that's just so nice. He came in and hugged you.
Yeah, Neil's a sweetheart. He's a truly sweet guy. He's a truly sweet guy. The only my other good San Diego memory is running into Patton Oswalt for the first time, and I recognized him. I said, "Are you Patton Oswalt?" He went, "Yes, I am." And then I introduced myself, and his eyes went thinking, "You wrote Swamp Thing," and I went, "Oh God, you are a nerd."
Oh.
That was 2010.
But how? Oh my, that is so awesome.
Yeah, and we've been friends since. I mean, he and I, I wouldn't say we're buddies, but we talk every now and again on Twitter.
Yeah.
And, he's a sweetheart. Patton's a real sweetheart.
Oh, that's nice.
He is a true nerd, and I'm proud of it. And I'm so glad that he's part of Mystery Science Theater now.
I just want to say one more thing before I start finishing up. I just thought it's so cool that you met Bernie Wrightson, and he like warmly accepted you, going, it's, finally we have a woman writing Swamp Thing.
Yeah, and Alan also, he and I've never met, but we used to talk on the phone quite a bit, and he was very, very much supportive of me and my decisions on the book, and he supported my decision to break up Swamp Thing's marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And his rule was, don't really tell him them women who write mine and stay in that. So, and I felt he was very, he was always very supportive of that. And it meant a lot to be able to talk to Alan, because Alan was also a huge influence on me as well. Just his way of reinterpreting, what we thought was standard,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
taking established characters and finding the new facet of which to make them new again, literally reinterpreting them.
Yeah.
And so he was highly influential on me as well. And especially his run on, I first became aware of him when he was doing what was Marvel Man in the Warrior magazines. And then, of course, stuff on V for Vendetta.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very much picking up what he was laying down. And when they said, yeah, he's going to be doing Swamp Thing, I'm like, yeah, I'll be there for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I proceeded to live in his shadow for the entirety of my run.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I like to think that his run informed mine to a great extent, and I tried to be inspired without imitating what he did.
Yes. Couple more questions, and I already asked you this before we recorded, but I'm going to ask for our listeners: have you and your family been to Hawaii?
No. I would love to go someday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm me and my friends here in Georgia, we're big fans of tiki culture. I have a couple of tiki bars in their houses. The pandemic really gave them time and occasion to expand on their tiki bars. And in fact, this friend of mine, one of his side gigs is designing tiki bars here. He's helped build two, one in Savannah, Georgia, and another one up in Brooklyn, New York, and they're beauties to behold. So it's I've always wanted to go, but unfortunately the situation has just not worked out.
Yeah.
Maybe someday, maybe someone will be good enough to invite me to for an all expenses paid trip to Hawaii for a conference or something, or who knows. And I do have a friend who lives out there, Mark Laidlaw. He's not on the Big Island. He's on, I forget where he is. But he was the guy who created Half-Life, the video game Half-Life. Because of that, he can live in Hawaii. Great guy, great writer.
All right. Any closing words to our listeners?
You can find my work on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com in both ebook and published in print formats. And also Comixology. Keep an eye out for the Blade Runner Black Lotus series coming out this summer. Like I said, also the Kolchak Kickstarter. I think you can still join the Kickstarter.
I think so, yeah. It's the kicker, backer kick or something.
Yeah, the backup kick. You may not be able to get the more elevated levels, but you can at least get the books.
Yes.
And support the books and get T-shirts and stuff. And I'm trying to think what else I'm doing. Like I said, I've got the Hell House anthology coming. That's gonna be beautiful. They do amazing limited edition work. This thing's gonna be like $200-$300 a copy.
Wow.
It's gorgeous. um, I've seen some of the artwork for it. They do tipped in color plates, and I'll be signing special editions and stuff like that. It's just gorgeous. Um, and I will be at Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, this June, the next to last weekend in June. Uh, uh, it's my very first Heroes Con. It's their 40th anniversary, and it's almost unlike a lot of the Comic Cons. There's like no Hollywood people there. It's all comic book creators.
Mm-hmm.
So and like this weekend for Free Comic Book Day, I'll be at Dr. No's in Woodstock, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
with Michael
Mm-hmm.
Linzer and his wife Kristen,
Mm-hmm.
and Mark Bagley, I think, is going to be there. And I'll be there from 12:30 to 3:30 Eastern Standard Time signing. I'll have a couple of copies of the Swamp Thing by Nancy A. Collins omnibus. It's just that's what they, it's like, what do we call this thing? We call it that. And it is what, and they named it what it is. And which is like 900 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. We already sold out. It sold out of the first edition almost immediately. And this,
okay.
And it's, I'm very pleased with it.
Yes.
And it's apparently introduced me to a whole new generation of fans because, it's been 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can figure out is like it took DC/Vertigo/Black Label, whatever they call them now.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, wait a minute. Didn't we have like an entire 2-year run written by a woman?
Mm-hmm.
We really ought to reprint that. And because I had given up on it ever being reprinted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To my knowledge, there's no plans for a trade edition.
Mm-hmm.
But it's done very well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's beautifully done. They managed to keep most of the original color steps. Colors done by Tatjana Wood, the widow of Wally Wood.
Oh, okay.
It's got color covers by Charlie Bess.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He'll also be at but both Charlie and Russ Braun, who also did some of the artwork for Swamp Thing, is going to be at Heroes Con. So we're going to try and get a little Swamp Thing get together and sign books together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful collectible. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, it's hardcover, so you could actually read it without it falling apart.
Yes.
And it weighs 7 pounds, so you can actually use it to kill a man.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you could, like, if somebody hit you over the head with this thing, it's a doorstop, to put it politely. I come from the era where, well, I always like I come from the era where you could actually people were murdered in movies with typewriters,
Yes,
and phones.
Yes. Yes, I remember. Yes.
Judges, okay, you kill a man with this. Okay. Can't do it with any of those anymore.
No.
But yes, I have produced a murder weapon. See, you kept there that much of a delay to laugh.
Okay, Nancy, on that note, I'm gonna close up.
All right, yeah. I'm a funny person. Now you know why I know some comedians, But mahalo for having me on your show. I appreciate that.
No, Nancy, I wish you all the success with your Blade Runner Black Lotus miniseries. And
took out the 2032 out of it because that made it a real mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
and then and thank you for your time. Mahalo. Thank you for your time, for giving me the opportunity to interview you. I mean, Nancy, you have an incredible history. I mean, everything from, it's like, literally, I mean, we're talking about the book of Seduction of Innocence to basically, to talking about, knowing Neil Gaiman,
Yeah.
it's incredible,
I didn't even mention the fact that I'm probably the only DC creator who actually had a relative who was a villain on the Adam West Batman TV show.
Please tell me this story.
My cousin was Tallulah Bankhead.
Uh-huh.
She played the Black Widow, not the Black Widow anyone knows now, but
Yeah.
this is the last thing she did before she died. She played the Batman villain, the Black Widow.
Uh-huh.
And I did not know that Tallulah was my cousin at
Mhm.
the time. I was about 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And I'm watching Batman.
Yes.
Dad walks in and points at the TV and goes, "That's your cousin." What?
Yeah.
What? So
No, yes, yeah. For a 6-year-old kid, that would like blow anyone's mind.
yeah, I was like way into Batman back then. All the kids were, but what? Yeah.
Yeah.
No one believed me when I said that either. I went to school and no, she's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, she also worked with Hitchcock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's the female lead in Lifeboat.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she was. Lula was quite. Daddy wouldn't let her hang out with us because she was quite a firecracker.
Mhm.
But yeah, I have a lot of intersection here. But yeah, that I've decided that's going to be my cosplay is Tallulah is the Black Widow. I'm
Mhm.
someone to replicate her costume for me,
Ah.
so I can do cosplay at conventions and no one will know who the hell I am,
Yeah.
except actors. The only people who know
Yes.
it's young actors. So that's about it.
All right. Like I said, I'm going to ask any more amazing stories before I wrap up.
Well, thank you.
No, but thank you very much. Now, for listeners, if you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, I'm sorry about that.
Take 2.
Yeah, that's okay. Now, if you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, please check out Blade Runner Black Lotus miniseries from Titan Comics. The first issue comes out on June 1st, and the second issue comes out on July 6th. And also, too, if you are a new Swamp Thing fan, and if you're, and if your local comic shop has a copy of Swamp Thing by Nancy Collins Omnibus, please check that out.
You can definitely get it from Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
Oh, okay, all right. And also, it collects issues from 110 to 139, Swamp Thing Annual 6 and 7. Also, a story from Black Orchid number 5, and a story from Vertigo Jam number 1.
Mm-hmm. Plus, there's also unpublished sketches by Russ Braun and Charles Vess and Daryl Hickson in there, like very unused cover sketches, and also a pitch for a Vertigo crossover series involving Swamp Thing called Arcane Blood that I pitched to DC and they never used.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned it down, but you get to read what would have been this crossover series that I was proposing for them. So that centers on Tefe Holland. Swamp Thing and Abby's daughter.
Oh, okay.
And it also involved, like at the time, Books of Magic, Hellblazer, um, uh, Shade the Changing Man,
Mm-hmm.
Animal Man, and a couple of other a couple other of the series that were a part of the larger Vertigo universe. Yeah, Books of Magic. The Three Witches are in there.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff. So
Wow.
yeah, the Vertigo that doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, and I want to thank Drew, the host at Comics for Fun and Profit. Drew, thank you very much for putting this episode together. Thank you for all your hard work behind the scenes. And if you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And I want to thank you, the listener. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.
Aloha.
Hey, it's the good folks at Comics for Fun and Profit reminding you that nobody Patreons like we Patreon. So join us at C4FAP and go over to Patreon/ComicsFunProfit and sign up at a level of your choosing. There's various tiers with various goodies for you. Something that everyone gets at any level is you get to be a part of our Slack channel community. And you get early and ad-free access to all our episodes. But wait, there's more. So go over to Patreon/ComicsFunProfit and check out all we have to offer. We urge you, sign up today.